Hey, it's October 6, 2020. I wanted to show you something that as a 7-year-old warped my mind, and it was so wonderful. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons the United States is such a wonderful country is because it produced, doesn't anymore, but at one time it produced publications that look like this. Now, it's the summer of, where does it say it there? Yeah, July 73. So I remember seeing this at an airport bookstore, and we're going from Hampton, Virginia, and we're moving back to my mother's hometown of San Antonio, where I would spend 2 formative years I talked about yesterday. My 3rd and 4th grade year, from 73 to 75. Those years were when I really got into superhero comics, before I was into monster stuff. And this cover, I mean, I knew there was no way my mother would let me buy it, and she didn't. But opening this up as a little kid on the newsstand rack, and of course, if you're not familiar with Monster Times, it was in the format of the Rolling Stone of the time, where it would open up like this, like a tabloid newspaper. And, you know, it was amazing. You know, here we've, it was really everything. Everything wonderful in life was here. And this is Frank Brunner art, or I used to think it was Frank Brunner. Maybe it is Brunner. Frank Brunner, Frank Brunner. I'm not sure how to pronounce these names. It's just it's a tabloid newspaper devoted to monsters, and it has, but Monster Times also covered comics, and of course it has Basil Wolverton. And just everything's great. Even subscription ads were great. Every single page is wonderful. Oh, they even have an article here about Blood Feast. Now, I wasn't going to see Blood Feast until 1984, when I I met some new friends in college, and that was in the early days of VHS cassettes, where you would, there used to be video stores on every corner. And then Blockbuster came in, and it was even more so. But you couldn't buy movies back then, because movies cost about $100, because they put them at a high price point, mainly because they didn't want you to own the movies. They wanted to sell them to the video store, and then they would rent them out and make their money back and all that. But they really didn't want people owning movies. And then, you know, Laserdiscs came along, and it didn't really work out. But DVD and Blu-ray, and then people own movies, but the movie studios really still don't want you to own them. So notice that the Blu-ray and the DVD sections are shrinking, getting smaller and smaller in all the stores, and they want you to stream the movies, which is outrageous, because then you don't really own anything, or buy the movies digitally. You know, that's another stupid thing, I think. I thought it was in this issue that they had that picture from the monster of Piedras Blancas, where the monster is holding a severed human head. If it wasn't in this issue, here's they always had a centerfold in the Monster Times, and it was Rodin, this particular issue. Oh yes, well, the Monster Times is one of those wonderful childhood memories. Especially, this is the issue I always remember that just was so great, and that's the poster image from Theater of Blood, the Vincent Price movie. And it's just, you know, any injury to the eye horrified my mother, and she would not let me buy a monster magazine if there was any injury to, and that's like the ultimate eye injury looking thing there. So, but you know, later I purchased this, and I'm still trying to complete a complete run of the Monster Times. And you know, another thing that's horrible about today is every time you go in the supermarket or the drugstore, you notice that the magazine section seems to shrink just a little bit more, to the point where really there aren't magazines put out today because people get their information from the internet. And I remember when Starlog came out, and Starlog would talk about movies that were coming out and movies that were in that they were planning in the planning stages, and that was like amazing. This was the newest information you could get was in the pages of Starlog. And now I realize that was already months old. But now you get information immediately within hours from Hollywood through the internet and through YouTube. And, you know, and that's great, and the internet's great, but I sure miss magazines. Because, you know, if there was something really cool I read on the internet back 10 years ago, can I go back and find that particular day's page on that particular site? No, but I mean, I can go back to 1973 and get a snapshot of the zeitgeist, or you know, just what things were like for someone into horror movies in the summer of '73. Well, this was the first issue of Monster Times I actually purchased. Well, I didn't purchase it. I traded it with a friend in elementary school. So, you know, that I didn't have to go through my mother to purchase it, so I kind of got it on the sly. And this issue is, if you didn't see it there, this is the worst issue of the Monster Times ever. So it was one of those issues where they tell you what's the worst of everything, the worst horror movies, and here the Monster Times always covered comics. The world's worst comics, page 6. Thought I'd read that to you because those of you into buying key comics, you might want to seek these out. Oh, I don't have my reading glasses, or do I? Yes, there's a pair on the floor. What I've done is I bought about literally 30 pairs for $1 at the Dollar King, or whatever the frick it's called, Dollar Tree. And so I just have them everywhere, so whenever I need to read, I have the smallest magnification. I think it's like 1, but I just need a little help because I'm getting old. I'm also, right now, the fattest I've ever been in my life. I just weighed myself a few hours ago. It was 258 pounds, which is, they're talking about President Trump being obese because, you know, he's gone through this problem in the hospital, and he's got out last night heroically, was emerged at the White House, and it was just like a movie. He looked like a superhero up there. But anyway, they're, you know, talk about his weight and his visits to McDonald's and all that, and they say he's like 244 pounds and he's 6'3", and then he's obese. And I'm 6 foot and 258, and I'm realizing, oh shit, I'm a lot worse off than this 74-year-old man. So if I was to get the disease that cannot be named on YouTube, man, I'd have less of a shot at it than the 74-year-old man. I gotta lose weight. It's been the COVID that's put this on. I go back to some of my previous YouTube videos and I realize I'm not this horribly fat. And then I shaved the little growth I was growing, you know, which no one sees because and my wife doesn't really like beards, but I thought, well, I'll grow it just because maybe it'll hide the folds of fat, you know, because, you know, when you get really fat, you grow the little beard, and you figure then people won't notice how fat you are, you know, and it doesn't work, especially when everywhere you go, you wear a mask, so this whole part of your horrible face is hidden anyway. So that's the great thing for ugly people is masks. Just wear them all the fucking time. So, what we got is articles on schlock, but, you know, that was made to be bad. Let's see, what else do they cover in here? I don't like that. I gotta be more careful. Oh, they have a whole feature on the Inferior 5. These are newspaper, they're made on newspaper, so they're very brittle. You know, that was look at that. You know, that looks like it's a horrifying movie. That looks like a brutal, awful, you know, the thing about these these magazines is they make really shitty movies look horrifying when you just see a still, and that's from the incredibly strange creatures who stopped living and became mixed up zombies, and that's like kind of a comedy film. But when you see that guy holding up the scissors about to stab her, that's a horrifying image when you're a third grader looking at it. Man, look at this stuff. You know, they had always had a comics feature in here. Look, they got this Neil Adams, R. Crumb. I mean, yeah, they always championed Star Trek. The Monster Times did. Famous Monsters didn't give a shit about Star Trek. Not knocking Famous Monsters, but Star Trek was never mentioned in Famous Monsters until the movie came out, and by then Famous Monsters wasn't really worth a shit anyway. Castle of Frankenstein covered comics. It probably had the first interview with Stan Lee right about, I think it was probably 65, 66, and they had Spider-Man on the cover, and same thing with Monster Times and Castle of Frankenstein was where you would get actual information about comics on the newsstand. Yeah, and this has just, and the one thing that was great about Monster Times is they had these ad mats, you know, for these horror movies, and of course they were meant to be seen printed in newspapers, and that they were printed, you know, with the, you know, the dot pattern that's perfect for a newspaper resolution, newspaper reproduction. So when, you know, what Monster Times they must have had tons of press books for these movies, and they would always use the ad mats, and then you'd always have, because what I used to do when I lived in Hampton and in San Antonio, I would get the newspaper and I'd open it up and I'd cut out all the monster movie ads and put them into a scrapbook that I had. So here it is, the world's worst comics. Yeah, Brother Power the Geek, showed you that a few weeks ago. Prez, what else do they? I'm going to read this whole thing to you, never fear. Yeah. All right, so it's story time. The world's worst comics, and this is written by, doesn't really say who wrote this. Picking the worst comic books ever produced is no easy task. Most of the comic books ever they kind of repeat here. Most of the comic books ever produced could be classified as some of the worst comic books ever produced. You could make a solid case for just about anything ever to hit the comic racks. But as cream always rises to the top, or so the milk people tell us, the ultimate products of comic schlock also stand out. And here to give those offending comics their just desserts is Doug Murray, eminent comic book scholar, who knows garbage when he sees it, which is a good virtue to have when you're an eminent comic scholar. So this is written by Doug Murray. Picking the worst comic book ever is no easy task. There have been so many candidates for that dubious honor over the years that selecting only one is well nigh impossible. Striving to be fair, I have eliminated all titles before 1955, reasoning that books done in that period, from the monstrous Atlas fantasy comics to the many atrocious superheroes, were done for a different, less sophisticated audience, and as such would be unfairly judged by current criteria. Further, I eliminated all titles designed for special interest. Thus, all those romance titles from Night Nurse to Young Love, and all the funny animal titles from Woody Woodpecker to the Hound Cats are out. After these eliminations, then, and a careful perusal of the remaining material, I narrowed the list to the following four: The Shadow from Archie Comics, The Geek from National, Prez from National, and Dracula from Dell. Actually, I have all those comics. I ought to pull them out and show them to you, but I can't do it in this video. That would be a logistical nightmare. Okay, so The Shadow was another of the Archie group's many attempts to enter the superhero field. After limited success with Flyman, the Jaguar, and the Mighty Crusaders, the powers that be at Archie hit upon the idea of taking an old established character, the Shadow, updating him and using him as a comic superhero, borrowing the basic shtick of the old radio Shadow, invisibility through hypnosis, and adding certain embellishments, a purple costume and mask, Archie took their revamped character and loosed him upon an unsuspecting world. The results were, to say the least, less than satisfying. Those who remembered the original Shadow with fondness, and there were many, were appalled at this lackluster, tasteless imitation. Those new to the character were simply appalled. The mag quickly faded into obscurity it so richly deserved. The Shadow doesn't deserve the title of worst ever, however. The idea of resurrecting the most popular hero of the 40s was a good one, and had the Archie people been more true to the original, perhaps the book would have been a success as National's version, with a fine, painstaking period art of Mike Kaluta now is. In any case, it deserves the label of a good try. Then we have Simon Strikes Out. The Geek was Joe Simon's first comeback attempt at National. Tired of the Simon Kirby team, Joe had decided to strike out on his own and convince National to give him a shot at a couple of his own creations. The Geek was Brother Power, an abandoned tailor's dummy that, when struck by lightning, was given life, fantastic strength, and less than fantastic intelligence. Befriended by the young hippies who had an inadvertent hand in his creation, the Geek was soon using his powers to fight against the oppressions of normal society and the depredations of other splinter groups, biker gangs for the most part. This book, badly written, especially the dialogue, poorly drawn in typical Simon style, still doesn't deserve the title of worst ever. The basic underlying story of the Geek is an allegory. Indeed, the Geek's rise from dummy to shop foreman, with many more advances ahead of him, is typical Horatio Alger stuff and does have a place in the American mythos. Prez is Joe Simon's latest attempt at that elusive comeback. After the demise of the Geek, Simon had gone back to his editorial chores at National and plotted his return. The result was Prez. Prez is the first teenaged president of the U.S. Initially given his start by a political boss, Prez soon declares his independence and his intention to do his best for his countrymen. The book's main weakness is the unreality of the whole situation. The boss has a happy face, just like those smile buttons you see everywhere, and the idea that a political unknown, a teenager from backcountry America, could rise to immediate national prominence is a naive one at best. Again, though, the book's saving grace is the fact that its premise is one in keeping with our national ideals. The idea that anyone, no matter how humble, can become president, untrue though it might be, is a cornerstone of the American political system, or at least the American political fantasy. Again, like the Shadow and the Geek, the basic idea of Prez saves it from winning the title of worst ever. Then we have From Dracula to Dracula. Dracula, then, is my choice for worst comic ever honors. Dracula was Dell's attempt to cash in on the popularity of the vampire movie and the success of Marvel's Dracula title, Tomb of Dracula. Dell, seeing these trends, decided to do something about it and use the original title Dracula, which they had a claim on because of their movie classic line, for a new superhero book. The Dracula of the title is a descendant of the original account. Unhappy at the understandable rancor attached to the name, this Dracula, a young scientist, is attempting to do something about it. Using the blood of bats, what else? He has developed a serum that will allow damaged brain cells to repair themselves. This, he feels, will permit the cure of insanity and retardation. Truly a feat the world would praise. Finishing his task, he places the beaker containing the completed serum in a rack, inadvertently spilling some. Embryonic superheroes are always clumsy. Spilling some in his drinking glass. Unaware of this error, he drinks a toast to his success. Immediately the serum takes effect, and instead of having his brain cells healed, he finds himself transformed into a bat. Returning to human form, why I'm not quite sure, he wonders what he can do with this strange power. But fate and the comic writer give him a quick answer. At the frontiers of his country, a convoy of trucks bearing soldiers and guided missiles appear. Their leader, Boris Evol, great name for a villain, huh? Soon makes it known that his intentions are something less than friendly. He takes over the country. One guard is no match for his trained legions, and proceeds to set up his missile base in readiness for a sinister scheme of nuclear blackmail. Chancing upon Castle Dracula, it's a very small country, Eval decides to take it over as his headquarters, and finding Dracula, the scientist there, forces him to work for his nefarious cause. From bat to worse. However, Dracula, a puny 98-pound weakling in civilian form, is more powerful as a bat, and with the help of other bats, he manages to overcome Eval's armies and kill the chief villain. The entire experience convinces him that he should use his powers to fight for good. And after a series of exercises to build up his human body and a trip to the tailor for the inevitable super costume, he takes the Dracula pledge immortalized on the zine's inside back cover. I pledge to the strange powers which have become mine to fight against the injustice, corruption, evil, and greed which fills this earth, in the hope that somehow my example will be an example to all men. The Dracula superhero lasted one more issue, in which he immigrated to America and fought Admiral Maltemps and his giant jet-propelled Zeppelins before retiring to the comic book crypt, hopefully for good. Comic book crypt. The Dracula books had many faults. They were poorly written, and apparently the people responsible were not sure if they wanted to be serious or not. The artwork was atrocious and the whole concept strenuously inane, even for a comic book. Attempting to cash in on the Dracula name in a superhero comic seems less than inspired, not to mention downright dumb. The resulting travesty is truly worthy of the title. Trumpet blast and drumroll, worst comic ever. The best summation is a line from the Dracula comic itself. Now run along before we have you arrested for impersonating a superhero. Amen. Runners-up for the title of worst comic ever include a lot of all-time losers. Take the following, for example: The Owl, a Gold Key comic of 1968. Another example of Gold Key's and Dell's desire to break into the superhero field. The Owl was what the name implied. A superhero in an owl suit. Flying an owl plane and having a companion named Owl Girl. What else? The Owl's powers are basically super scientific. His owl plane houses controls for Owlos, owl-like robots who can batter criminals into submission and blow them into atoms. They can also be taken over by criminals. Very weak control systems and used against the police. The Owl gun seems a simple stun ray, and it must have a slippery grip since Owl constantly drops it so that his enemies can retrieve it and use it against him. All in all, another all-time disaster. And then we have Captain Marvel, a 1966 ripoff from MF Productions. This Captain Marvel bore no relation to either the famous Fawcett character, also known as the Big Red Cheese, or to Marvel's Marvel. This Captain Marvel depended on the lure of his famous name and his power to split his body into numerous segments in order to fight his foes. He accomplished this by yelling the magic word "split" at the top of his lungs. If you can picture a superhero with a head here, an arm there, a leg here, torso there, etc., you can get some idea of what the whole mess looked like. The comic lasted 4 issues and spawned a 25-cent companion, the aptly titled Captain Marvel Presents the Terrible Five. Then, under threat of lawsuit from national periodicals who own the Captain Marvel character, since its settlement with Fawcett, folded quietly and without fanfare. To be or not to be. B-Man, a superhero attempt for Harvey Comics, a company whose lineup to then had been limited to such titles as Casper the Friendly Ghost and Little Audrey, was another winner. A 25-cent giant, it featured 3 main characters in separate stories. B-Man, the title character, started out interestingly enough as a man mad at Earth for the way it's treated him. Seems he was attacked by giant bees, yes, bees, from Deimos, one of the Martian moons. The bees were brought to Earth in a government spaceship, and their stings changed the metabolism of Barry E. Eames, notice the initials, making him like unto a native of Deimos. The government, predictably enough, placed him in a hospital for study, but Eames escaped, traveled to Deimos for instruction in his new powers, and returned to plunder the world, All in all, an interesting idea. However, in the second issue, a decision by the Queen Bee, sick of Deimos, to conquer the Earth makes Eames remember his humanity and causes him to renounce his life of crime. Now intent on becoming a crime fighter, Eames becomes a member of the FBI, their spelling, not mine. It's all downhill from there. Also featured in the B-Man comic were such great characters as the Glowing Gladiator, a reincarnation of Hannibal, who fights evil with a magic sword, and Magic Master, a kind of genie who helps the young son of a murdered magician fight evil sorcerers. I may be wrong, but I think the Glowing Gladiator was Jim Steranko. I think he designed the character. I could be wrong on that. Before he worked for Marvel, like one of his early things. Where was I? A kind of genie who helps the young son of a murdered... Did I read that part? Fuck it. A kind of genie who helps his young son, the young son of a murdered magician, fight evil sorcerers. The gimmick here was that the storyline is interrupted at intervals to give short lessons in magic, much the sort you see on the back of a Good and Plenty box. Yeah, it was Jim Steranko. For that matter, the stories are about as entertaining as the front of a Good and Plenty box. And then superheroes. Another of Dell's attempts to crack the market. The superheroes of the title were the Fab Four, teenagers who, through sheer force of will, could enter the bodies of androids and thus gain miraculous powers. The androids, incidentally, are display pieces in the Dell Hall of Heroes, along with such all-time comic greats as Nukla and Toka the Jungle King. Why androids with superpowers are used as exhibits is never explained. After 3 issues with the kids switching bodies back and forth, the 4th and fortunately final issue features a story wherein they are imbued with the androids' powers in their own bodies, thus setting up the usual secret identity rigmarole. And then the great reprints ripoff. Crypt of Shadows, Journey into Mystery, Supernatural Tales, etc. This is a whole series of reprint titles put out by Marvel Comics, apparently for the sole purpose of making a lot of easy money. The stories are generally from old Atlas comics and feature some of the worst scripting and artwork extant. Reprints are cheap to put out since the sole expense is the printing bill. Artists are not given any money on reprinted work, so a reprint book needs fewer sales to be successful and can serve as an easy source of extra funds. Seems to me that a reprint line that doesn't at least print the best material available is merely an attempt to rip off the collectors who buy everything and those unwary few who know not what they do. So that's their article. Oh, look at this cool t-shirt ad. Actually, Supernatural Tales was not a reprint title. Oh, well, this is some guy's opinion, not necessarily mine. And I could have sworn that Dracula, when Dracula was a superhero, I could have sworn that was earlier and not a rip-off of Tomb of Dracula. I think that was more in the the '66 era where everyone's putting out superheroes. I could be wrong on that. The artwork is terrible. I think it's Tony Tallarico, who's always been one of my the artists I hate the most. I got this book when I was like in 7th grade, How to Draw Comics, and I got it at the General Bookstore at the Forum Mall in Arlington, and it had the worst artwork in it. It was teaching how to draw comics, but it was done by Tony Tallarico, who's the worst comics artist ever. And the artwork was so bad that I remember drawing, because they'd have artwork and then have you finish the comic strip, and I drew artwork that was better than Tony Tallarico in 6th, 7th grade. It's 6th grade is what it was, and I would make fun of his art, and I'll find that book one of these days and I'll show it to you. Horrible. Tony Tallarico. Yeah, he's behind some of the worst nightmares I've ever seen. Yeah, so Monster Times, you know, this is kind of what it looks like. There's a guy on Facebook. He creates fantasy covers, like if Monster Times had kept going, what would the covers have looked like? And he just creates new images that look like Monster Times covers, you know. And Monster Times was right there in the early '70s, covering EC Comics, which had been gone like 20 years at the time, and I think they helped out with the EC Comics convention there in New York. Let's see, what else have I pulled out here? How much time? I'm going like 30 minutes in, huh? Yeah, the other day I was showing you some of this British magazine, Starburst, which is kind of like England's version of Starlog. This is a later issue. You Are Earth's Only Hope. This is one of those role-playing games. I never got into those. A lot of my friends at junior high got into those role-playing games, and I just never did. It seemed like it was way too complicated. It would take too much time to study all of them. I mean, I think the only thing I did as far as Dungeons and Dragons is I bought the monster manual just because I thought it was cool to have all these monsters in one place in a book, and it was fun to read. And some of the artwork was good, some was terrible. I still have that. It's probably worth some money to those kind of people now. Now what is this? It's think of this. It's some kind of DC British. Got a British theme today, and like Gold Key used to do, they put the artwork on the back. It looks like artwork that would be like spray painted on a van. You know, it's not terrible, but certainly not good. Okay, so what we got in here? It looks like we got 60s era Wonder Woman stuff printed and in black and white, and then Batman. This looks like 70s era Batman. Yeah, very 70s looking. So yeah. So this is what they're reading over there across the pond. What else do I have here? Oh, this is some nostalgia magazine, and it prints ad mats, the stuff you would have seen in the newspaper advertising the movies. Oh, I remember, yeah. I think I got this because of Fay Wray. I always loved Fay Wray. I got to see King Kong at a theater in Dallas in the 80s, and Fay Wray was there in the theater with us watching the movie, and she walked down the aisle right past me. She was very short. And then I think, yeah, I also saw when RoboCop premiered. I was there, and the guy that played RoboCop, whatever his name is, that guy is like real tiny. He's as short as Fay Wray. He was, and then I thought, yeah, I had kind of mixed feelings about that movie, but all the people that rented, even the little bit, you know, extras were all around me in the theater, so exciting. What else do I have here? Oh, yeah, this is Marvel's attempt to rip off famous monsters, but it's actually really good, you know, because it actually has words, you know, the articles are actually written instead of just being puns, you know, like, I'm not saying, oh, it has comics in it too, I forgot that. Yeah, okay, this is Barry Smith did the art for this. Oh, look at this. Now that Morbius is important because they're making a movie. I just saw a trailer. I think it's a new trailer for Hellstrom, their Son of Satan TV show that I guess is going to be on Hulu. It looks just like everything else on TV. It looks nothing like the comic book. You know, I guess it kind of looks like what Netflix was doing there. And some of the, I mean, Daredevil was good and The Punisher, but you know, like when they do Iron Fist, and it doesn't look anything like Iron Fist and that kind of thing. Yeah, I guess they, oh man, I love this Planet of the Apes magazine. And this art by Sid Shore is a little, I guess they put a little comic story in there. But there's actually pretty well written articles in here. Monsters of the movies. Great cover. Tremendous cover. Did I pull out anything else? I just like go through a box and I pull out a few issues that I think might be entertaining. And this looks kind of like the Aurora model kit. Nice cover. Look at those 70s people running in horror. Yeah, it's, I think I've got, there's another issue with Mr. Spock on the cover, and I think I have that. It's in another box, because I bought it more recently. Oh, yeah, so see, look at this ad down here. If you see the trailer for Hellstrom, there's a girl in it, the kind of a goth-looking girl. That's what she's supposed to look like. She's supposed to look kind of like Vampirella, and her name is Satana. Of course, you know, you got a good thing, you own the rights to it, and it doesn't even look like they have him with the pentagram on his chest. And the fact, and they just go with, okay, what would be the most cliched thing if he's the son of Satan? Yeah, make him dark with dark hair, because and a beard, that'll make him look like the son of Satan. Well, but when you have the son of Satan, he's got blonde hair, and maybe some of the curls of the blonde hair kind of come up like horns. But he's a blonde guy. His face kind of looks like Superman. That's not what you expect the son of Satan to look like, so therefore it's cool. And the fact that he had a cape, go with it. It's cool, and it's actually funny. And if you went with that and made a Son of Satan TV show and made him look like that with the big collar and the red cape, you know, people would be amazed that you had the balls to put that on the screen. They'd be getting tattoos of that character. But what this Hellstrom show, and it could turn out to be okay, but it looks like every other show on TV. It seems like there's about at least a dozen shows that have Satan as a character. You know, you notice this? Just about every TV show. You know, my wife and I watched the show Supernatural. It's been on like 50 years, and they've got Lucifer, they've got archangels, they even have God is in there as a character. I don't ever hear people talk about it. It's kind of disrespectful, but there's a TV show called Lucifer, and then you've got the Sabrina show that is, unlike the comic book, is goes really into the satanic angle. And man, there's other shows, I can't think of them, but there's a ton of them that have the devil in a sympathetic or role or something. Let's see, what is this? It's only a movie. I'm trying to remember what this was. I think, why do I have this? Because it doesn't look like it's a very good magazine. I think it reviewed the magazine that I put out, and I think that's why I have this issue. Because you know, when you put out a magazine, you would review other magazines, and then you'd get them sent free to you, and that's how. Let me see if this does that, because I can't imagine why I would have this little thing here. Not to insult the people that made this, but there's some reason I own this. Joe Bob Briggs and Monty Python. Very flimsy paper. Jeez. Does it talk about the Sophisticate, my famous magazine? I don't know how many issues I put out of that. I mean, how many copies I put out of each issue. I may have printed 500, but I may have printed less. It's whatever. If you've got a copy of that, it's pretty rare. But I guess they're out there because I sent them all over the United States, and I think even to foreign lands. I don't know. Oh, it's got like stuff about the cramps, I guess, in it. But yeah, okay. So it's got an article about the cramps, and I would buy anything that had the cramps in it at that time. So that's why I've got that. Speaking of my old magazine, The Sophisticate, I was promising I'd read to you an article from that. Let me do that. Because I promised to do it. You know how promises go. Yeah, speaking of Son of Satan, I did an article on, because at the time, in 1990, when I was putting that magazine out, Son of Satan was like something no one even knew ever existed and was in the dollar bins. Now everyone's like speculating, hoping it's going to become huge, and they're going to have, you know, the next big key issue. I don't know, what issue did I do that in? This is my magazine, The Sophisticate, that I used to put out. Not in that issue. That's issue 18. Boy, I'll tell you what. This is a magazine a friend of mine put out. He had the Robert Tilton fan club, and he had a newsletter. I think I've got a complete set of that. Yeah, Robert Tilton was on TV all the time, and we just thought he was really funny, and my friend created a fan club, you know, a tongue-in-cheek fan club for him, and maybe it's in this issue. And he even got on the news, and this film crew even came from England and filmed a fan club meeting that we put together for the show. Yeah, here's an article about the fan club. Love that Bob. And, you know, I put Robert Tilton's head on a Jack Chick track. Yeah, and he even had t-shirts made. I still have a t-shirt of that. Oh, and this is a sticker that he would give out. Robert Tilton Fan Club. Yes. In the good old days, back in the 20th century. Okay, Carolyn Jones. I don't see the Son of Satan in this issue. It must have been an earlier issue. Review of the God Bullies. Oh, yeah, I remember the God Bullies. That was a punk rock band. I remember seeing them in Dallas. Back when I still went to shows and went to see bands, at a certain point I was mugged and had to I wound up in the emergency room over in Dallas, and then I wasn't really that excited about going to Dallas anymore because I associated Dallas with horrible violence. You know, after John F. Kennedy was shot, the whole country hated Dallas, even though Dallas had nothing to do with that. Here's my article about Warren Comics. Boy, it's printed so damn small. Wow, I can't. Look how small that print is. Let me read this to you. Warren Comics Remembered. Because the next time I dig this magazine out, my vision may not allow me to read this. Jim Warren had a vision. Wow. He wanted to be the next Hugh Hefner. After publishing several Playboy knockoffs, such as After Hours, and failing miserably with each one, he decided to cash in on the nation's obsession with monsters, which had begun with the syndication of Universal's horror movies to television in 1957. Warren enlisted the aid of Forrest J. Ackerman, an insufferably unfunny nerd who had been collecting horror and sci-fi memorabilia since the 1920s. This embarrassing idiot deserves respect, however. This is my writing 30 years ago, and he was alive at the time. I'm sorry, I was much younger then, and I haven't read this since then. Wow. This embarrassing idiot deserves respect, however. The magazines which he began to edit for Warren, Famous Monsters of Filmland, for all his stupid attempts at humor and fanboy puns, was one of the high water marks of the cultural renaissance of the 1960s, even though there were others that were written better. Castle of Frankenstein, for instance. No other magazine could compete with the sheer volume of movie stills that Ackerman had amassed in his years of collecting. In short, Famous Monsters changed my life. Flushed This print is so small. Flushed with the incredible success of Famous Monsters, Warren decided to expand his line. In the early 60s, he introduced Creepy, a comic magazine emulating the look and imitating the look and format of the notorious horror comics of the early 1950s. Warren enlisted the aid of many of the same artists who had worked for the original comics, and American children were reintroduced to well-done, gory, and sexy comics. If this was all that Jim Warren had done, one would have to admit that his impact on this generation was greater than Dr. Spock. But he didn't stop there. A companion magazine of Creepy was rushed out called Eerie. Over the years, Eerie was to become more of a showcase for weird, twisted horror-related superheroes, and Creepy would remain the standard short shock story repository, a la Tales from the Crypt. There were other aborted Warren projects during the 60s: Screen Thrills, Illustrated Spacemen, Blazing Combat, but none of them lasted more than a few issues. However, in the last year of the 6th decade of the 20th century, Warren was to have another success, something that would make a tremendous impact on all red-blooded boys and girls and change the face of the cultural landscape. A new comic heroine was designed by acclaimed fantasy artist Frank Frazetta, on the lines of 50s pinup queen Betty Page, years before The Rocketeer. The name, thought up by Ackerman, was an attempt to cash in on the provocative French comic strip Barbarella. The character was from a planet called Draculon, where blood flowed in rivers. Of course, it began to dry up and she headed for Earth. Wow, man, I feel like I'm at the eye doctor trying to read the lowest line on the chart. She, before long, learned how to control her bloodlust through methadone-style injections and set about fighting evil, such as the cult of chaos. There's not much more. My eyes can't take it. Tragically, the Warren line was killed off by Star Wars and its ilk. When R2-D2 appeared on the front cover of Famous Monsters, we knew it was all over. Before long, space themes had begun to dominate every title in the Warren line, and it was suddenly no fun any longer. The youth of America had stopped believing in coolness, and the Warren line disappeared back into its cave, just as the James Bond movies and the Rolling Stones should have. Some things are just too good to continue existing in modern times. Recently, Harris Publications has bought the rights to all of the old Warren material, and they're beginning to reprint it gradually. Vampirella and Creepy trade paperbacks have recently hit the stores with less than overwhelming sales. I don't know if that's true, because a panel from one of fan writer Bunny Saunders' miserable attempts at writing a story. I reprint a panel because Buddy Saunders, the guy that runs mycomicshop.com and used to run Lone Star Comics, he wrote a story for Warren And this is a panel from it, and below it, it's the caption says, "A panel from one of fan writer Buddy Saunders' miserable attempts at writing a story for Eerie magazine." He's the he's the same cretinous wimp who won't carry Peter Baggs' hate comic in his Lone Star Comics chain. I've mellowed in my opinion of Buddy Saunders. I think he's a great guy, but he didn't like adult-oriented comics and stuff. And like when they started to put the character, the fuck was his name? The biker guy in Superman. It was like a biker guy with chains, a villain in Superman from another planet, and he was like supposed to be this rapist that had all these children on different planets. Can't remember his name. But when they had a separate comic for him, but then he'd appear in the Superman comic, and that was like where they had the rape and everything. And then he'd appear in the Superman comic, and Buddy Saunders got really pissed that they were letting a character in these adult comics cross over with the Superman line. And then he thought that that was bad influence on kids. So he put all the DC comics in the back of the store and put the Marvel in the front because he didn't want kids to be exposed to DC as much. And then he hired little old ladies to greet customers when they came in the door because they'd be like a grandmother, and it would they'd make comics seem wholesome to the people coming in. And so those things back in late 80s, I guess I was pissed because I was a young guy and I was thinking, how dare he censor? But now I realize that character, what the frick was his name? That shit doesn't belong in regular comics. I don't know. But plus Buddy Saunders fought against the red light cameras that they had all over town here. He went to the city council and he fought hard, and they wound up pulling them all down. And now you don't have to worry about, not that I run red lights, but you just don't want what if they go wrong and give you a ticket? That's what I was always afraid of when you're going through a yellow light. So, yeah, Buddy Saunders, I shouldn't be reading this article because I don't want to be online saying bad things about him. He's really a nice guy. Plus, who knows, maybe I can get a job from him at some point in my retirement, but not if he sees this video. In the early 1970s, there would occasionally appear a story in the pages of Warren's Eerie magazine that didn't quite fit. After reading about bog monsters and walking corpses, one would turn the page to encounter a sissy story with elves, fairies, and hobbit-like creatures. "What the fuck is this?" you would say while flipping forward to the next story. More than likely, what you had encountered was the work of a fan writer named Buddy Saunders, who went on to become the millionaire founder of the Lone Star Comics chain in 1977. You see, Warren publisher Jim Warren was a cheap fuck, and he knew that teenage fan writers would work for practically nothing in order to experience the thrill of seeing their names in print. Buddy Saunders was one of these starry-eyed kids. It is awfully ironic because Saunders would never in a million years carry a magazine like Eerie Today in the stores he runs. No, he won't even carry Peter Baggs' Hate, the finest comic currently being published. Saunders has been one of the foremost proponents of the censorship of comics just for the last few years. When Lone Star Comics was just starting out, they had no guilt feelings whatsoever about selling me National Lampoons when I was only 12. Now that they're established, however, they suddenly have morals. Don't expect to find any Betty Page stuff in this shithole comic store. They got a lot of wholesome All-American baseball cards, though. Excelsior, Stan. Oh, that's what I was pissed about. There used to be a fanzine called The Betty Pages, put up by Greg Theakston, I think. And I bought every issue, but I couldn't get it at Lone Star Comics, my local comic store. I'd have to drive all the way over to Dallas or somewhere to get a copy of it, or and that was a frustrating thing to me, apparently, back then. So that's, but I need to find my Son of Satan article. That's what I promised you. But I'll probably have to do that in another video. Yeah, I forgot the writing in this is very, very toxic. Hey, don't mess with the fluorescent light there, Pete. I'll come back in another video because I may run out of tape here, or it's not called tape, it's digital, but you know what I mean, memory. What Pete's doing here, Pete is fascinated by this fluorescent light, and he likes to claw at it, and I don't want him to damage it. Oh boy, do I look fat. Well, I will be back in a few moments.